Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the second session of the Fall 2021 ACLS webinar series, Gargoyles, Angels, and Saints, 45 Years as a Liturgical Designer by J. Hall Carpenter. My name is Pam Hardiman, and I'm a member of the ACLS webinar committee, and we're always looking for new people to work with us if you're interested. Our speaker today is J. Hall Carpenter, an ACLS member and member of the board, and a liturgical artist and sculptor since 1976. In his first 20 years, Jay worked as a sculptor for the National Cathedral, and he now has his own studio. Welcome, Jay.
Thank you very much, Pam. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it was a great pleasure to prepare this conversation with you. I began my association with the cathedral in 1974. I came to the cathedral campus as a student and was at St. Albans School for Boys. St. Albans is a feeder school for the cathedral choir, and although I didn't sing in the choir, I certainly spent a lot of time at the cathedral, and especially looking in the carving shed, watching the stone carvers at work. When I came to the cathedral, it didn't look like this. It looked pretty much like this. And you can see over here to the left, this is where the West Towers will one day be. And just above this scaffolding would be an observation gallery where you can get an amazing view all over Washington, D.C. Well, I was very happy at St. Albans, well, relatively happy. And then after being there for 2 years, the headmaster invited me to leave for reasons that are now lost to history. And I decided to, it being June, I would march over to the carving shed and see if I could get a summer job. And after a little back and forth, they did hire me. And they were all sculpting gargoyles, so I decided to sculpt one at home. It was the first sculpture I ever did. And this is what it looks like. It's a gremlin committing suicide. You can see he's holding a knife here and he's cutting his belly open. And I thought that perfectly reflected my love of mythical creatures and my feelings about high school. Well, as I brought it in and showed the master carver. He carved it and put it on the building. And then I was introduced to Frederick Hart, who was doing major sculptures for the cathedral. And I began working for him. This was the first sculpture of his I helped with. It's called Ex Nihilo, Out of Nothing. And it's the central tympanum over the west facade of the cathedral. It's 23 feet across and 18 feet high, and that is a wall of clay. And my job, one of my jobs, was to make sure the clay stayed on the wall. So there was a lot of repairing of the armature and rebuilding it when he wanted to make changes, things like that. And I was pretty good at that. And I continued to work for him as needed for about 14 years. I finished high school, and when I came back during the summers, the cathedral would give me little projects to do. And they started, so if I can show you this arch right here in the right-hand corner, that is a window, and that's this pilgrim observation gallery. And I began creating gargoyles, clay models again, for that drain the roof just above this pilgrim gallery. This is a crooked politician. He's tampering with the scales of justice, and on the other side, his pocket is stuffed with money. We thought, this being October, we'd bring in some Halloween type creatures along the way. Now, the cathedral is very whimsical. All of the grotesques and gargoyles are done with a lot of humor, and this is a robot that's looking down on the vice president's residence. These were gablet terminations, and they were generally done in pairs. The one in the foreground is Famine with an open mouth and empty hands. And this is his partner, and he's Gluttony, and he's holding a spoon and has a big drumstick stuffed in his mouth. These are each about a cubic foot of stone, and most of them were carved in the shop on the ground, but some of them were carved in place. Darth Vader is a very popular character. Here we have it's called Warhead. He's a military guy with his finger on the button, and he's holding nuclear weapons. This is another shot of Famine, an elephant and a dog. And this is the pair to the robot. This is a fully automatic camera. And then I don't know if you can see this. I'm in gallery view, and one of these is cut off. But this is a gablet for those unfamiliar with that architectural term. And this is youth. It's a baby, a screaming baby. And this is old age. I can't see it on my screen, but I hope you can. As it turned out, every time I sculpted a baby at the cathedral, it was a screaming baby. I'm not sure why that is. Then above the observation gallery, about halfway up the towers, there was another opportunity, a row of gablets. And in talking to the clerk of the works of the cathedral, we decided, since creation was the theme of the west facade, that this level of gablets should be the animals of Noah's Ark, God's creation. And we paired them so that we didn't have to make as many models. And I made all the models for these, and you have the parrot and the rabbits and the warthog here and the rhinoceros, and no ark would be complete without a pair of flies. And here they are stacked up, ready to be assembled on the building. This is my friend and colleague, Walter Arnold. He lives in Chicago, and he's carving one of the rabbits. And you can see he's using a pneumatic air hammer, which really speeds up the process. It's much less laborious. The hammer does the percussive part of it, and it's so fast, so much faster than striking it with a regular mallet, that it's been estimated that if Michelangelo had had pneumatic tools, he would have left us with twice as many unfinished marble carvings. I did the last 11 gargoyles. This group is above those animals of Noah's Ark, and these are 3 feet long, and they were carved from half-scale models. This is a griffin wrestling a snake. The snake, that's the head of the snake there, biting the griffin in the neck. And then the underside is all snakes and arms in combat together. The strategy for these gargoyles is to keep the top of the gargoyle very smooth so that no water collects and the rain and the ice can run off. And then the underside has to be very interesting, because that's the view that everyone gets when they visit the cathedral. These are up in the air, about over 100 feet in the air. So they're sculpted with a boldness that wouldn't make sense on the ground. This is my favorite of my gargoyles. It's a horse skeleton, and it's much compacted to fit into the stone. You can see the front hoof here and the back hoof here. This is a shoulder blade, and this is the leg. But that was a lot of fun to do. As I began working my way up the towers, creating these models, I was the only sculptor doing this, and it began to dawn on me that I was going to be given the opportunity to create all the work on both of the west towers. And sure enough, I ended up doing that. And that took the course of almost 20 years. These angels are on the pinnacles. I haven't really been showing you what the carver's models actually look like. These are full-size plaster models, and a pointing machine, which is really just a mechanical arm, attaches underneath, and there's a similar attachment on the stone, and the machine is transferred from one to the other to transfer the measurements, say the tip of the nose. So this is a singer, a painter, and a musician. Let's see here. Here's the painter in place on one of the intermediate pinnacles. And here, so this is a great pinnacle. And you can see the angels all around here. There are 32 angels on each of the great pinnacles. And this is an intermediate pinnacle, and it has 4 angels. The idea was that on the great pinnacles, it would be an orchestra, and on the smaller pinnacles, there would be representations of modes of worship that were out of the ordinary. Like this is teaching, this is preaching, and prayer. Those are all fairly ordinary, but we also had art and other things. And here I am celebrating the completion of the towers. Here's that, oh, I lost my cursor. There it is. Here's that griffin. And this is a row of angels here, and another row here, and another row here. There are 320 angels up above the roof there. So inside, I also did work on the cathedral. This is over the entry to the crypt, and it is the Easter morning miracle. Alleluia, he is risen. Why seek ye the living among the dead? The women are returning. They find the tomb empty. The angel stands there, and the sleeping centurion. This piece is about 6 feet wide. It goes over a double door, and it's in the chapel of St. Joseph of Arimathea. And here you can see it being carved. It was carved in the studio and then installed in the crypt. The crypt had been, the tympanum for the crypt had been installed many years ago, but never carved. And so it was replaced with fresh stone and carved. And what I would like to say is that this piece is available, the plaster model for this. I own it, and I can't sell it, but I would like to find a home for it. So if any of you consultants are working on a church where you think this might fit, I'm looking for a permanent location for it, and we can discuss the details. And that concluded my 20 years, so it was 1996 now. The towers are finished, and I'm looking toward the horizon to see what's next. As I was going along, I was working for other churches as well. I created this angel first for St. John's Church on Lafayette Square in DC, and then there was another version in Florida, and this version is in Gaithersburg. Each one is a little different. And I was also asked to do some cemetery pieces. So this piece is called Emerging Woman, and it's in Rock Creek Cemetery in Washington. A lot of my work was very local for a long time, which was wonderful. I really loved having the opportunity of embellishing my own community. This is St. Mark's Church on Capitol Hill, and this sculpture functions pretty much as signage. The lion is standing on a ball, and there's a banner that says St. Mark, and it's on the corner of the church. And this is a bronze, of course. And then in about 2000, I began getting public commissions. This is the Henson Memorial at the University of Maryland. And the wall behind Jim here, this is a ramp allowing access into that building, of the Student Union building. So the front of the sculpture was very important, of course, but the back had to be as well. So I created this vignette of the two of them in conversation, talking about their next big collaboration. And about that time, the ACLS discovered me, which has been a wonderful boon to my liturgical career. I began working with John Buscem. I've worked with Christine Reinhardt, Marilyn Morgan, Carol Frenning, and Gail, and they've all reached out, and we have worked together on 20 churches and hospitals and installed 35 sculptures over the course of the last 20 years. And as a result, my work changed for the better, because it was better informed. And in working with the liturgical designer on a given project, there was a greater appreciation for creating an entire environment and how these pieces all work together. This is, on the left, is my sculpture of St. Paul in Damascus. It was for a church in Winston-Salem. And so Paul is in Damascus, he's been blinded, he's removed the sword of persecution and holds it like a cross, and he's trying to intellectualize and come to terms in his mind with what his heart has already accepted. And on the right is the first project I did with John Buscem, St. Anne's Catholic Community in Barrington, Illinois. I see some heads nodding. And this was quite a surprise. He called out of the blue. He had been talking to a friend of mine who mentioned my work. And they said, hey, we'd like you to wonder if you could do a few statues for us. I said, well, yes, I'd love to. And then it became 6, and then it became 12. And they gave me the entire upper level. These are 16 feet in the air, and they're 5-foot statues. And this is also St. Paul, some almost 20 years later. And here it's St. Paul in chains as a prisoner in Rome. And you can see the scroll, he's writing his letters, and he's looking down on the ambo, making sure that the word of God is being appropriately read. So here's some other examples from that church, the St. Joan and St. Patrick and Thomas More and Mother Cabrini. And this was a really unusual opportunity, because although I'd done full-size statues before, I hadn't done many, and I hadn't done a group of them. And so the challenge was to find ways to vary them. We couldn't really repeat any of the poses, and also to find a way into the biographies that was compelling to the viewer. So what I came up with is to find some point in their lives where their faith was tested, and that was almost universally adhered to as I did the 12. So we have Thomas More, where he has to resign as Chancellor of England. So he's removed the amulet of power from his neck, and he holds a religious text to his heart. And of course, in this case, it costs him his life. And then we have Mother Cabrini, who immigrated from Italy to establish a mission in New York. And when she'd been promised this mission house, and when she came to the address, it was a vacant lot. And she had to decide, do I move forward? Do I stay in this country? Do I go back to Italy? She stayed, and of course became incredibly influential. At the same time that project was going on, John and I began talking about another project in St. Charles, Illinois. This is St. John Newman's Church. And he wanted to create a corpus for this cross, for a cross. I'm not sure he had the cross designed yet. And he wanted me to sculpt it, and we began talking about the idea behind it. And what I wanted to do was create something that was equally appropriate at a christening as it would be at a funeral and at a wedding. Something that could be interpreted in a variety of ways. So this to me represents the surrender in the garden, the crucifixion, and the ascension all in one piece. And this was the largest version that we did, but for other churches, it's smaller. This is an enormous worship space. And John designed the cross for this. And he wanted all of his crosses to have a portal in the center, so that we could think of the cross as a passageway. We go from life to death to life again in heaven, eternal life. This is at the Jesuit residence at Georgetown University. And here, it's a very small space, and we decided to not use a cross at all. This is, again, a bronze casting, but it's a different version. This is a smaller version that's 5 feet 4 inches tall. The other one is 6 feet 7 inches tall. And another version, this one I believe is in Iowa. This cross appears a couple of times, but whenever possible, a unique cross was made. And this is in Sauk Rapids, Minnesota, and she's looking at that crucifix. This is the Annunciation, where the angel comes to Mary. And that's a life-size bronze. It's not in its environment yet. There was a screen and candles behind it. Then moving on, this is a Saint Bartholomew. He's been stripped by his captors in a foreshadowing of his flaying. The illustrator and teacher Howard Pyle said you should throw your heart into a painting and climb in after it. Well, I think that's appropriate to sculpture as well. And this is one of my favorites just for its power. This is the clay model. I don't have a good picture of the bronze. This is Mary, Mother of Sorrows, and it's a fabricated piece. The face is cast bronze from a sculpture I did many years ago. And then the drapery and the halo are made out of cut nails, masonry nails, welded together and patinated. Not all of my consultants are liturgical. I worked with George Lucas and Steven Spielberg on the new film school at USC, and created the statue in the background. I'll give you a better picture of it. This is Douglas Fairbanks Sr., who suggested to the president of the university back in the 20s or 30s that they have a film school there. And so he's, again, he's the greeting sculpture. He welcomes people as they enter the courtyard. And then there's the Lucas building to the right and the Spielberg building to the left. This is St. Andrew's Cathedral in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And my sculpture of Bishop Barraga. Give me a better view here. He was known as the snowshoe priest. He walked and canoed all through the Great Lakes year-round to bring the word of God to the Native Americans and to help them in their legal struggles. And he also documented their language and wrote the first grammar book of their language. This was done with Christine Reinhardt. This is Mary Magdalene Church in Brighton, Michigan. And this is actually a painted plaster of Father Solanus Casey in the lovely shrine that she helped design. And another secular piece, this is the Virginia Patriots. It's done for the courthouse lawn in Leesburg. Here's the finished bronze, and the plaza that goes around it isn't put in yet. But this statue stands on the cornerstone of the old courthouse where the Declaration of Independence was read for the very first time in Virginia. And it's a farm family walking into Leesburg, which was a muster point. And they're about to say goodbye to the father, and the boy is carrying his dad's gear with pride, and the wife is thinking about the future and what it holds for them. I'll take you a little bit through the process. I was asked to do a Thomas Aquinas for Aquinas College in Grand Rapids. And we settled on more or less on this particular portrait as the best example of what we thought he should look like. This was done 100 years after his death. So it's one artist's impression informing another artist. And then I found the appropriate model, and this man, Gene Morrill, was the president of the Association of Graduates at the Catholic University, and a good friend of mine, and he had his own Dominican habits, so he was the perfect choice for it. So first we create a maquette, and this is a 31-inch tall clay model that was taken up to Grand Rapids so they could see something of what the sculpture was going to be like. And then we had to figure out the scale and the approximation, the proportions between this sculpture and the pedestal, and then the sculpture and the traffic circle in this case, where it goes. There are two cutouts here. The one in back is a 7-foot tall statue and a 6-foot tall base, I believe. And we ended up with the one in front, which is a 9-foot tall statue and an 8-foot tall base. And I think if I'd brought a bigger one, the statue would be bigger today. The one in the back is what they thought they needed, and I was pretty sure that was too small, so I brought the biggest one I could fit into the van. And then we go about, and some of these tools are over 100 years old, and some of them are handmade by me and others purchased. It's always a hodgepodge. You can find some good antiques on eBay, and some of these come from Frederick Hart. And here is the full-size statue in progress. You can see in the background here, Mother Cabrini. To give you a sense, she's 5 feet tall. And some of the details. And this clay model then had to leave the studio, and it was too big to fit through the door. So I designed the armature in 2 pieces so it could be taken apart to go to the mold maker and then the foundry. And here's the finished piece. I've never gotten the photograph I want of this because there are all these beautiful trees in the background. But I seem to always be there in the winter when they don't have any leaves. But it was a wonderful project to work on. And this is St. Catherine Drexel at her church in Frederick, Maryland. This was a very special project for me because the donor of the project had actually known St. Catherine Drexel when she was a teenager. Catherine Drexel was the dominant force in her high school. And she established mission schools all over the country. And this is my sculpture of St. John for the same church. The school is called St. John and the church is called St. Catherine, and they're just a stone's throw from each other. And this one came about, the design came about because I wanted to find a way to show St. John with his attributes, the lily for Mary and the eagle, and do it in a way that didn't seem forced. So I thought, well, those are both ornaments that I've sculpted on capitals before. And since he was in this imagining, the John at the cross is the same John who wrote the gospel. Since he's a writer, we'll have him seated with a scroll on his lap. And we see here a pillar. He was called by St. Paul one of the three pillars of the church. And I keep losing my cursor. There we go. This is another view. We can see the eagle here, and there are actually three of them. Here's the beak of one, here's the beak of the other, and then the one you can actually see from the front. And in between, there are lilies. So all of that symbolism is hopefully incorporated quite organically and in a pleasing way. So you can read it for symbolism or just think of it as part of the architecture. And I've tried to do that throughout my career. And this is the final crucifix I'll show you. It's not the most recent to go in. It's the second to most recent. This is at that same church with St. John and Catherine Drexel. And this is my favorite installation. In this case, I got to design the cross, and it's a mild steel cross, and this version is a painted plaster crucifix. And here I've taken John's idea of the cross being a portal and expanded it to its logical conclusion, where the sculpture itself could fit right through this portal and go from life through death to life everlasting. And thank you very much. That's my presentation, and thank you for your attention.
I just want to thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. You are obviously an intellectual with such a background in classical literature, and your imagination, the way that you deal with both modern looking figures that are very realistic, and then the gargoyles. I mean, so many of them, and such they all have meaning. There's such a variety of subjects that they deal with. It's just incredible.
Thank you so much. That's very generous of you.
And I also love that you started when you were in high school. It seems like this was maybe a place that you went to that was there as a stepping stone. It was, the high school was just there so that you could get to that cathedral and see what it was that you were really meant to do. And I can't imagine anyone saying to J. Hall Carpenter that you don't belong here, but
well,
it really doesn't matter, because the school served what it was meant to do in your life, which was to bring you to the next place. So I think we can.
Well, Pam, that's very much how I feel about it as well. Looking back, if I hadn't gone to that school, what would I be doing now? I don't really know, because I hadn't sculpted prior to that. I'd been very interested in art from about the third grade on, but didn't even consider it as a career. And then suddenly I was able to see all of these men at that time. There were women later who worked on the cathedral, but all of those men who were, this was their career. They were making a living at it. And that was very eye-opening for me.
I think my favorite piece of all the pieces that you showed is the one with Jim Henson and Kermit the Frog. Because there's such the communication that you were able to capture between the two of them is just wonderful. Mindy,
thank you very much. You know, Kermit came to the studio and modeled for me for 2 or 3 weeks. And I have to say, it was the best model I've ever had. He never moved a muscle. He didn't cough, didn't need a break. He was great. Gail, I saw your hand up.
I had 2 thoughts. One is, if you started just by walking into the sculpture shed, where in the world did you get your training? Just on the job?
No. Yes. I had taken some ceramic classes in school, and I made pots and ashtrays and the things you make in school. And I had, you know, I didn't fall from the sky. I had had some art lessons, some private art lessons, in addition to what I was getting in school. And I think that was a way for my mother to get me out of the house. And so I had done some, a little painting and drawing with a teacher over from about the 3rd grade on, off and on. But, you know, I spent my 2 years at St. Albans not studying, but watching the stone carvers. So I was getting some training in that I was able to observe them almost every day.
It's still astonishing because, I mean, to draw something in 2 dimensions is one thing, but to be able to sculpt as carefully and as realistically, and I mean, a lot of your sculptures remind me of Michelangelo's style in terms of very muscular and emerging from the medium. They're great. But the other thought I had was, I can see how those gargoyles, when kids are in high school, they draw pictures of monsters and dinosaurs and strange Trekkie things, and you just had an opportunity to do that in 3 dimensions in stone.
Exactly. It was all stuff that I was doodling, and I had been, you know, fantasizing about working at the cathedral for a couple of years. And Frederick Hart was very generous when I worked with him. He showed me everything. He loved to tell stories about the old days, and everyone was, you know, I was the kid. I was really young, and nobody saw me as, you know, they just they were incredibly generous. Nobody saw me as a threat, and they shared everything. So it was yeah, I can't imagine better training. And then I did go off to Pratt Institute and was there for 2 years, and eventually finished my degree at Catholic University 15 years later.
Great, thanks.
I have a quick question, and actually maybe you've actually already responded to this, but do you feel that the playfulness of doing those gargoyles early on as a sculpture helped inform your later work? And I was just noticing the expressions that you have, especially on the faces of your sculptures, are just magnificent. I mean, they're just very human, but also very expressive. And I just wonder if that had any bearing on you as the sculpture, since you kind of came into this in a slightly different trajectory than most.
I think, yes, I think you're right. As soon as I had an opportunity and could talk people into it, I started executing portraits. And I was, you know, if you were my friend in those days, I did your portrait in clay. And I began working on that because I knew that's the direction I wanted to go. And it would also help me to be a better sculptor's assistant for Rick Hart. We didn't get into my work with him that very much, but he and I worked on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial together. And I built the armatures and massed up the clay. And then I got to sculpt the weapons for that. So he was trained, anything I didn't know how to do, he would train me to do. And I guess I was the handy sort, and I like to solve those engineering problems that come up when you're working on a large scale. So I was useful to him, and he was generous with me, and it worked out really well. So I would say there was that training, and then Malcolm Harlow was the carver at the cathedral who was my favorite sculptor, and he was always very expressive, very dramatic, and I emulated him in my style there because he was everything. he was amazing. And my horse skeleton gargoyle is actually an homage to his human skeleton gargoyle, which was deemed too delicate to put on the building, but it was absolutely brilliant, and I didn't want it to go away altogether. So that was my little thank you to him.
Can you say a little bit more about how you designed those gargoyles? Like, you're working in clay when you're designing those, right? And they're not the size that they end up to be.
Right. Yeah, those were all half-scale models, the gargoyles in particular, and the grotesques as well were half-scale models, with the exception of the animals of Noah's Ark, which were done very small. There was a point in the cathedral, my experience of the cathedral, where they were deeply in debt, and they let a lot of very talented people go, and they kept one stone carver, Vincent Palumbo, and one sculptor, me. And I think that's why I ended up doing the towers. I think I just forgot what the question was.
Oh, just the process of going from the clay to the gargoyle.
Right. So we had lying on the ground all around the carving shed, uncarved blocks that included the piece of molding that was part of the stone, and then this blank square. So I knew exactly the size and the dimensions and how it projected and how it would be viewed, all of that. And then I would reproduce that in clay, the molding and everything. And then it was really just a matter of, you know, how do I fit what I have in mind into that block? And that was always the challenge. And occasionally I would do something that got turned down as being too delicate, or, you know, this isn't going to work. We can't, this isn't going to last, because everything we did, we wanted to last for centuries. And it's a pretty harsh environment. There's traffic nearby, and, you know, acid rain and all of those things. So wanted to create things that wouldn't erode due to all those conditions. So if I did something wrong, they told me, and we did a new one, and that resolved those issues. But there were a lot of examples too. I guess that's the key, is that the cathedral had been under construction for some 80 years before I got there. And there was work everywhere to show me how it's done. So I built on that.
Peggy?
Just had to unmute. Thank you, Jay. I thought that was really a lovely presentation, and it's particularly interesting to. I mean, I love seeing your tools. They're quite wonderful, and then to see the process, the whole process, and I'm just struck at how you know, you're it's like listening to someone who's a throwback from how earlier generations, I mean, much earlier generations of sculptors were trained and how they were apprenticed and nurtured. And it's just really, it's lovely to know that this has happened in our day. And I have a couple of questions. When you talked about the angels and the different angels, were you working with, were there someone at the cathedral that you worked with who was a theological consultant who said, well, we want this, 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 or was this were you given free rein? So that's one question. And then I'm just, well, why don't you answer that? And then if we have time, I'll ask these other
Okay, well,
questions.
let me address what you said prior to that. Yes, I felt very lucky. Frederick Hart had worked with Felix de Weldon, who did the Iwo Jima Memorial. And he had worked with a number of other old timers. And he had a plaster company, an ornamental plaster company, as a side business. And he had a partner running that. And then they shared a warehouse space. So Rick was over here and David was over here. And so when I didn't have work to do for Rick, I was sculpting ornament too, which is very exacting. And that was part of my training. You know, everything had to be measured very precisely. But the reason I thought of that is because when I started working at that plaster company, they were still using animal glue molds on a weekly basis. And they would melt the animal glue in a double boiler made of 2 trash cans and pour it hot onto the clay models. And, you know, so old fashioned and so traditional. And so, yeah, it was pretty interesting to see just mold making, how it's changed. The process is still the same, but all the materials have changed. And then what was the other?
The theological consultant.
Oh, yes. I worked primarily with Richard Feller, who became lay canon Richard Feller about halfway through my time there. And he was he was not really trained in theology or iconography, but he had worked with other people. And when it came to my earliest pieces furthest down on the towers, just above the observation gallery, I was making those up, and none of them were rejected. That was just out of my imagination. And then I think that he came up with the idea of the animals of Noah's Ark. And then just above that, there was another row of gablets, which I didn't show you, that were flowering plants. And then above that, he said, well, you've got 8 gargoyles to do. So I decided to make them 4 human and 4 animal. And then the humans were 2 male and 2 female, just as a way of organizing it. And then I had some, you know, it goes back to mythology and other things, and I had some ideas for it, and actually made Canon Feller one of the human gargoyles. So he's an angel falling out of heaven because he's stolen halos. For no particular reason, and he never realized it was a caricature of him.
All is revealed now.
All is revealed.
So my other questions are, it sounds like you didn't, that first gargoyle you didn't carve, you made a model and someone else carved it. Is that right?
Yes, I never
Okay.
did any carving, although I did a wooden crucifix at one point based on.
So what is the difference? I mean, because you started off making models for sculptures that were going to be carved and be very far away from where we could see them.
Right.
So it would seem to me that would be a very different task from modeling something that's going to be cast in bronze, and it's you can walk up and touch it. And so I was wondering about the difference that difference in working for something that's in stone and very reductive, and something that's going to be highly detailed in bronze. And then even when working in bronze, you must at some time, like with Thomas Aquinas, are you taking into account the fact that he's so much higher above us? I know that a lot of times scholars say that some of the distortions you see in Michelangelo's Moses, because that was supposed to be higher up and we're looking at it head on. So I just wonder about those two factors.
Well, let me address that first. As I was doing Aquinas, I have in my studio a hydraulic lift. So I can push a pedal and raise the sculpture from about 4 inches off the floor to eye level. So I can work on toes without ever bending over, and then I lower it down. And because he was in two pieces, I could take the top part off and put it on its own stand, and then put that on the lift and lower it down to the floor. So I could work on his head again without getting on a ladder for the most part. And then I have one wall of the studio has a 12-foot mirror, so that I can stand behind Aquinas, look in the mirror, and then see him twice as far away. So all of those things help me to visualize him at various heights. And but the odd thing about that particular situation is that he wasn't going to be seen close up. It's pretty hard to visit a traffic circle, and it's not a place you would linger. You'd go to have a look. But where he's seen is from, as you enter a driveway, you're actually above him and you're coming down a hill. So in that situation, there was no need to distort him in any way. I've played with that idea from time to time, but I've never had the occasion where it was really necessary. Even in at Barrington, where the sculptures are up high, you can actually go up on that balcony, and that's seating too. So they're seeing them close up, and they're looking straight across the antiphonal worship space so they're not seeing them in a distorted way. So there wasn't really a practicality to doing that. So I'm still looking for that project where they're way in the air, and I can fool with proportions and really express my inner Michelangelo, but so far it hasn't happened.
And the difference between modeling for stone and for bronze?
Oh, yes. Well, so as soon as within 2 months of being at the cathedral, I was introduced to Frederick Hart, and Rick was doing bronzes as well as, and he didn't really like the concept of designing for stone. He was a bronze guy, and so he took all the delicacy of bronze and put it into his clay models, and then let the stone carvers struggle with it. But I have found, 20 years is a long time, and it does influence you. And I've found that when I'm sculpting for bronze or whatever, I'm using, let's say there's a little piece of fabric that's hanging off an arm or something. I'm making that pretty massive in thickness, because there's still some part of me that's still thinking stone, and that's an aesthetic of mine now, where I like things to have that solidity, even if it's, you can do amazing things, delicate, spindly things in bronze, but I still hold on to that density, I think, a little bit.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to email you with some questions about foundry questions.
Oh, okay.
For now, but
wonderful.
Thank you. It was lovely.
Oh, I'm so glad you could join us today.
Karen, did you have one last quick question?
Not really. I was waving at Peggy, but but I do want to say, Jay, thank you so much. This has just, to hear a sculptor share his life and work and approach has, and the beauty of it all has just filled my soul. And it is marvelous. And
Well,
I see this, the Spirit of the Lord working through you, and the results of your work is also deeply spiritual and symbolic, and it just comes across, and the beauty gives so much glory to God. So I just thank you. Thank you
very much. I couldn't have asked for a more pleasant audience today. I really appreciate you all being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Could you share your screen one more time and go to the last slide?
Yes, let me try to do that.
So thank you everyone for coming, and we will see you next